and good morning.
Good morning.
So we want to talk about how we can use data-driven approaches to make planning decisions for the future mobility for the Southern California region, but we actually want to start our story about 100 years prior. That begins with something you can all hopefully recognize, the Titanic. Something interesting about this, I was watching this with my family a few weeks ago during the Titanic. They're talking about how they've laser scanned this. They can see kind of the full picture now of all the wreckage and how it's scattered and patterns on the ocean floor. I'm describing to my family about how we use similar processes in infrastructure planning, infrastructure solutions development. I'm explaining LiDAR and I'm explaining data-driven decision making. All of a sudden, Dad has a cool job, and they understand Dad's job. So I think key to what Pat and I, in our message today, we want to share is making this more attainable, making it more something that can be more fully realized to get a group of stakeholders on board, both internally on our teams, as well as the stakeholders in your region. Fast forward 50 years, roughly, and we're going to hear how SANDAG has been using similar approaches to make these decisions.
Thank you, Darren. We are going to fast forward a little bit, but in keeping with kind of the historical theme of this, SANDAG is customer number 54. We've been doing this for a very long time. Jack Dangerman worked with us in 1971 to develop our first land inventory system. We also developed our first regional growth forecast in 1971. In 1981, we developed our first regional transportation modeling forecast. As you can see in this next image of the land inventory system, it has evolved significantly, and the region has grown significantly in that time as well. In 1985, we started using ArcInfo Workstation to develop and maintain our master transportation network for our transportation model. This model is still maintained to this day in a sophisticated suite of tools in ArcInfo Workstation. And the reason being is that the dynamic segmentation we use for transit routing and modeling is still, in that vintage of software, the most effective for us to use. Fast forward a few decades. In 2010, we started working toward some open data initiatives. We executed a memorandum of agreement with SANGIS, which is a JPA between the city and county of San Diego. We stood up a kind of a first of its kind regional GIS data warehouse where we have over 300 layers available in the public domain. We began publishing REST services. Some of those services get upwards of 100,000 transactions a day. We also, in recent years, started transitioning away from this regional GIS data warehouse into a more of a portal environment, and began using ArcGIS Online for more collaboration, both internally and externally. The other thing that we do and have done for decades is also lead, co-lead, or coordinate regional partnerships. These are large-scale data acquisition projects, such as elevation data. We now have a seamless quality level 2 LiDAR-based DEM and 2-foot contours for the entire region, something that in a region of our size, we've been after for many, many years, and we were very thrilled once we got that project complete. As I mentioned, contours, these are all available in the public domain. We also do a lot of cartography. Still in this day and age of web mapping, we do cartography, which is something that our GIS analysts, really love to do. We also, after our 2017 imagery partnership project, built a regional building outlines database. This database is currently being updated. Thanks to Darren and HNTB's team, we're leveraging their workforce to help us update that, and we'll be doing it on an annual basis. We've also done some other things that are very important from a regional perspective, and that's develop a regional base map using local data. It's updated on a monthly basis, cached and available in the public domain, as well as regional metadata standards, which are adopted by our 18 member agencies and some of our local entities and NGOs. So driving forward, so what's the relationship with building all of that kind of foundational data over the past several decades? What we're really looking to do at this point is take it to the next level with a culmination of several initiatives, taking the building outlines, 3D enabling them with a lot of other data layers that we have into a regional 3D base map, building an ArcGIS urban interface for sketch planning and scenario planning, and really helping to inform and tell the story that we're always trying to tell and convey to both stakeholders, politicians, we have members of the public, CBOs. It's an extremely important part of how we develop projects. So one thing that's a little bit different about SANDAG is that not only are we a long-range transportation planning agency, but we also develop capital projects. We administer a half-cent regional sales tax. We have a criminal justice regional data clearinghouse. We also own and operate a toll road. So we have a very diverse set of responsibilities that we undertake on a regular basis. One of the things in the regional transportation planning context is that every 4 years we develop a regional transportation plan. There are certain requirements that we need to meet with respect to greenhouse gas emission reduction. Some changes recently in how we analyze projects related to VMT, vehicle miles traveled reduction. One of the things that makes it very challenging from a mechanical standpoint is how do we reach the reduction in VMT using kind of a traditional mechanical approach to developing a regional transportation plan. So we really were given an opportunity from our executive director, Hassan Akrada, to think about a transformative vision for the region, thinking about 5 big moves to support that vision. What are those moves? Complete corridors, really optimizing our roadways. Transit leap, making transit competitive to the automobile. Mobility hubs, activity centers, places where people congregate, access transportation by various modes. Flexible fleets, which really are designed to help us with that first mile, last mile connectivity issue. These are things like TNCs, Uber, Lyft, et cetera. Micromobility, scooters, microtransit, neighborhood electric vehicles. These are the types of things that will help us connect folks within the mobility hubs to the transit corridors, through the arterial system, through active transportation networks. And then the next operating system. That's really the enabling technology that will tie all of this together. Think of your cell phone being able to plan a trip across all of these modes to get to your destination in a region that's over 4,200 square miles. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Darren, and he's going to talk about this data-driven approach. And really, when you think of data-driven, we've thought of how we develop our plans as being data-driven since we've been doing regional plans, since 1971, since we did our first forecast. So really, we're taking this to a different level in terms of really looking in advance at what are the opportunities for us to develop some of these supporting systems to truly create a vision, create a region where transit, highways, active transportation, all of the different modes are connected together and do a much more effective job of moving people. So Darren?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So how do we achieve something like this? Bold new vision, right? Bold new concepts, and we have to iterate through a lot of the planning decisions using data, using the resources we have. So Pat and I had collaborated early on when this was first being presented as something we need to achieve together, and decided to use this, what we call web-first approach. It's going to sound very familiar to you, but essentially it uses the extent of the ArcGIS platform in a way that we can collaborate data, apps, maps across those multiple shared ecosystems, right? It also makes the decision very easy to decide where should my data go. The answer is always, well, web first. So a couple of things that are important in thinking about this. Branding. Even though it seems like a minor thing, by giving meaningful thumbnails, something that's a really strong visual indicator to all of your content, goes a long way to help understand and identify what your users are dealing with. It needs to also be visually appealing as well as have a professional look and feel. They need to understand instantly what they're looking at. We also use this concept of what we call mapplications. Really, those are just focused applications that apply to the different user groups or departments as a part of your initiative. And what we find here is as between the branding and identifying of these focused applications or mapplications, you can really get a lot of support and ownership across your team because everybody wants their own mapplication. Everybody wants to own those pieces of content. And you can really rally your entire team around an initiative like this. Something also important is you have to realize that you're not going to have it all figured out in the beginning, but you need to have a plan for the overall approach, how you're going to tackle this. And you have to be agile and nimble to those changing conditions. One example on this particular project, we knew we were starting out doing an agile project management approach. We had 3-week sprints. Each move had a particular set of goals to achieve in those 3 weeks. We originally thought we were going to create one mapplication for each move. We quickly realized that it's more important to bring everyone together in a single mapplication. So our data reviewer app here is what we continually brought everyone into, looking at the daily, sometimes hourly changing data and iteration through each of these concepts that each move was determining. And obviously, you have to stay committed to something like this, be consistent, and be ready for lots of iteration. So Pat, where did we start?
So SANDAG has done a lot of work with respect to trying to, find that answer of where people live, where people work, how they travel, when they travel, and what mode they use. We recently did a project where our chief economist developed, in coordination with our data and modeling team, what are known as activity centers. There are 79 different employment centers in the region, and they're tiered by concentration of employment, employment sector. And so then we took other information for example, LEHD data, where we have block-to-block origin-destination pairs, and we started looking at the travel patterns with respect to employment centers. Once we did that, we started looking at, non-commute trips also have a big impact on the transportation system. There are mobility needs that non-commute trips also need to have addressed. We leveraged some third-party data, some location-based data, to help us look at other types of trips, non-work trips, other time periods outside of the peak period, weekend trips, interregional trips from other counties in the Southern California region. So that helped further inform us to figure out kind of the universe of origin and destination pairs with the data available that we have to start looking at in more detail those travel patterns and start working toward that next step in the process of building that foundational data and doing the analysis to get us to a point where we could create this new vision in terms of these 5 big moves.
So let's wipe away some of that digital exhaust for a minute and go back to these OD pairs that Pat was talking about, where people live, where people work. So just in that center portion there of San Marcos, we know that about 20% of the employees are actually just traveling from within that employment center. So bringing back data like Pat referred to of where are the jobs, where is the population, we can start doing iterative kernel density analysis, aggregating those statistics together and looking at it in reference to the employment centers. All of a sudden, we can start determining where might possible mobility hubs be as one particular focus of the moves. So Pat, what is a mobility hub?
So SANDAG developed a pilot project that took a look at different areas within the region with different characteristics, different land use, different employment, different feel to that community. This particular example is in the city of Oceanside, which is in the northwest portion of our region. What we're seeing here is kind of a before and after conceptual rendering of how you could transform one of these areas in kind of urban, suburban beach community where you take redevelopment, restriping, add in some of these micromobility, flexible fleets types modes, start minimizing parking, as the previous presenter talked about. Parking is a significant issue. How do we transform some of these corridors into a more active transportation, pedestrian-friendly environment while keeping mobility, keeping access, and keeping the ability for people who choose to drive an automobile happy, so to speak. So essentially, that type of activity center is what we define as a mobility hub.
So knowing what they are intended to serve in terms of the 5 big moves, then we have to use some of that data to determine, well, where do these even make sense? So we're showing here just kind of an early iteration of possible mobility hub locations. Then we have to start looking at, as a part of that aggregation of density analysis, how much population could we be serving? How many employees could we be serving? What if we do different drive and walk sheds around those hubs? Going through continual iteration and analysis, we ultimately arrive at some distinguishable possible areas for each of those drive shed patterns. But we also used other techniques, human-centered design in the form of surveys and other outreach to the San Diego region to try to ascertain, what are people willing to do in terms of participating in portions of these moves? How far will they travel? That had to also inform our decision-making as well as what the data was telling us. So once we have some possible mobility hubs in terms of an approach to start iterating through this, the Transit Leap move team also could look at those potential locations as possible Transit Leap corridors. And Transit Leap, as Pat mentioned earlier, is just being competitive with the automobile. So looking at ways with higher speed train or automated vehicles that we can really make it more attractive to use as an alternative to the automobile. So using the hub locations, we could start also iterating through these Transit Leap connections. We could start looking at different tiers of service, different train speeds, all the way from 65 miles an hour up to 110 miles an hour, trying to be competitive with those same origin and destinations of a comparable drive time. Again, to make it attractive to get away from the automobile and onto these other versions of transit service. We also needed to incorporate, though, well, what is our existing infrastructure? What are our current transit locations and different forms of even bus stops? Ways we can leverage existing investments in infrastructure that have occurred and supplementing with other future potential locations of hubs, flex fleets, Transit Leap, and so on. Ultimately getting to the point where these all start culminating and working together.
So I think one of the things we really want to think about is how do we pivot from this in terms of all of the data and analysis and the results that we've developed so far and start looking at bringing that to our communities, further engagement with stakeholders, bringing it to our board of directors, having our elected officials weigh in terms of how does the region truly feel about this transformative vision and this suite of different options that they may have in the future available to them. Being a lifelong San Diegan, to me, is a very exciting time to be thinking in this manner. I mentioned, climate action goals, GHG reduction goals, vehicle miles traveled. Those are the types of things that we are mandated to, from a regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy standpoint through legislation, to actually consider and make sure we meet those goals. So for us, this is a really exciting time to bring this out, to take that next step and begin the mechanical process of developing our regional transportation plan, which will be released late next year. So with that, we thank you very much. We appreciate your time. It's been a privilege presenting to you today. And if you're interested in taking a look at the transformational vision, the 5 big moves, and finding out more, feel free to go on to the San Diego Forward, sdforward.com story map location. view the story map, interact, learn more about it, learn more about the plan. And I want to note that this will be changing in the near future. Darren and I and the teams are going to be taking this to another level, using some of the new story map templates that we find are very exciting, very dynamic. The URL will stay the same, but the content will be new, and there will be additional content, and we'll actually present some of these networks and different elements of the 5 big moves in that next iteration of the story map.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.